Hey everybody, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest, and today I have with me Christian Annexy. He is Project Director for McCarthy Building Companies, and we're going to talk about alternative delivery models. So Christian, thank you so much for being on the call. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Appreciate the invite.
So in our October issue, you actually wrote an article about alternative delivery models for us. Um, why do you think that the exploration of these types of models is so important for especially the water industry and the wastewater industry moving forward?
Well, I think it's important because we need to start focusing our efforts from the owner's perspective on value. And I really do think alternate delivery adds a level of value to projects that hasn't been seen through traditional delivery methods. What's in the water sector, predominantly it's been initial low bid cost, whereas alternate delivery really does focus on a collaborative environment that drives home other things that contractors can bring to the table, whether it be qualification-based selection about safety, quality, schedule, cost certainty is actually something. Initial bid cost is only one portion of project delivery, and it's really final cost. That's something that owners are focusing on. So exciting to see the growth that water owners are interested in choosing alternate delivery methods, but it really drives home the value.
Yeah, so could you outline just on a basic level, kind of like the primary alternate delivery models that people are looking at these days?
Sure. So there's several, there's numerous ones out there, and from our perspective, it's not a one size fits all solution, right? Projects really have their own pulse and their own heartbeat, and they're really set up for differing methods. Some of the more popular ones that we see, especially in the water sector, from an alternate delivery perspective, are construction manager at risk or CMAR projects, design build projects, and then even in design build, there's a subcategory of progressive design build that lends itself towards a lot of the work we do as well. There's also a CSP, it's called, and that's competitive sealed proposal, which really takes a traditional design bid build mentality and thrusts upon it a qualifications-based selection criteria that doesn't just require the selection of an apparent low bidder. So there's numerous avenues, and that's only a handful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other ones, but there's numerous avenues. Those are certainly the most common and seem to be the most successful as well.
Yeah, and those seem to be the most common from what I've read with projects as well. In fact, several of our top projects for 2020 are construction manager at risk projects, so some CMAR projects. Could you describe what CMAR is for people who wouldn't know and why it's kind of different from other models that are commonly used?
Yeah, absolutely. So CMAR is a great selection delivery method. It's funny. It almost could be called pre-construction manager at risk because that's really the difference here. Construction manager at risk method is most similar to the traditional in that you have a two-entity approach, right? The owner is going to hire an engineering firm, but also then hires a construction manager. So they manage two contracts. The real distinction with construction manager at risk is that the contractor or the construction manager is on board early in the design or conceptual phase of the project, such that they're brought on board even in schematic design that they can then develop with the engineer cost estimating, budgets, schedule, and start thinking about things like constructability, value engineering, things that are just hard for engineers or architects to kind of think through on paper.
Mhm.
That value added, that management focus of the entire process, rather than just being the constructor or the builder, really adds a tremendous amount upfront in the project. There's quite a bit of diversity of thought brought into the project early on that lends itself to just really some promising results as you go through design development and ultimately into guaranteed maximum price for a contractor or construction manager that's still at risk, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for the breakdown on that. And then you
sure.
mentioned the design build side as well as the progressive design build. Could you talk about what those are and how they differ from each other? Because one you said is kind of like a subset of design build.
Yeah, absolutely. So design build is a really interesting approach in that it it's a single entity approach for an owner where there's one contract, right? And they're going to solicit companies and typically a JV firm between a designer and a builder, whether that's a contractor and an engineer or an architect and a contractor, remains to be seen. But the owner is going to look to get qualifications, shortlist those firms, and then move to a proposal process where that single entity, a design builder, comes up with an initial conceptual design into schematic and then proposes to the owner, this is what I feel is best for your program. The owner then goes through a selection criteria of, kind of whose idea is best and what they like the most, and they move on from there. Progressive design build is a subset of that that's very interesting and a lot like CMAR in a way, where you hire the design builder not to necessarily provide you a proposal about what they think for design, but you hire them early on, and then with the owner's engagement, you progress a design. So it's a very, very collaborative atmosphere that requires a lot of owner engagement, but it really, really lends itself towards enacting the owner's vision through the final result of the project.
Yeah, so depending on kind of the value that the owner is looking for and how much time and energy they can effectively add into the project could help decide which of these is probably better for their project in particular then.
Absolutely. That's certainly one of the aspects that they need to consider when deciding on a delivery method.
Yeah. So you mentioned one other, this CSP, the competitive sealed proposal. Could you talk a little bit about that? I was a former news reporter, and I feel like that was a lot of what I wrote about, where they just got sealed bids. They kind of went through which ones
Right.
seemed the most effective for them.
Yeah. So the water wastewater industry is funny. We're old dogs, right? And it's hard to teach that old dog a new trick. So we really do like the traditional design bid build model in many areas. And CSP is almost exactly that model, however, adds a value-based selection to the approach of the bids, right? So the contracting community submits their bid for the project, as well as a state qualifications proposal that then the owners have some selection criteria and metrics that they measure, not only just the apparent low cost, but they also do take into account safety, quality, schedule, project approach. And also CSP does allow contractors to put forth value engineering right at the onset of a project. These are things, like I said, on paper, sometimes they don't translate as well as they do in the field, and the contractors really do bring that value to the table. So CSP, in conjunction, if an entity or a governmental municipality is stuck on traditional methods, CSP is something I'd strongly recommend for sure to get a taste for it.
Yeah. So what are obviously a lot, like you said, there's lots of models for this. What are some of the pros and cons between choosing between the ones that we've discussed here today?
Okay, so there's a lot of them, right? And alternate delivery as a whole typically allows for more engagement and a more collaborative atmosphere, right? The traditional design bid build model, a con of that would be typically you see an adversarial relationship time with engineer and contractor, possibly even owner at times. Alternate delivery ideally lends towards partnering and teaming right from the onset. The other thing that alternate delivery lends itself to is, intuitive thought about the design. So there's review of constructability, value engineering, early cost certainty. CMAR, one of its biggest advantages would be early cost certainty. Contractors and construction managers really do know the market best, as well as know how to build, right? That's why we're the builders. So when a contractor or construction manager is hired early in the design phase, we can certainly provide that early cost certainty through estimating and budgeting at schematic design that then lends itself towards GMP. The engineers are good at it, but during a traditional design bid build approach, one of the cons there that we see is often projects wind up coming in over budget. And that's just something that CMAR really tends to mitigate quite a bit. The other, in terms of design build, progressive design builds specifically, that's an entirely collaborative atmosphere of which everyone is swimming the same direction. Everyone has that common goal. And to your point earlier, the only con here would be owner engagement, right? The entity needs to make sure that they have the resources and availability and decision-making capability and skills to be able to guide the progressive design builder to enact the vision that the owner wants. There's many others. I mean, there's tons of other advantages and disadvantages, but typically it's going to focus around cost certainty on the alternate delivery side, and then schedule. Right. One of the things I wrote about in the article was the infrastructure in this country, especially wastewater infrastructure, is aging. We know that. So there's a lot of need to have these projects delivered in a really timely fashion, in conjunction with emergency drought response or even emergency flood response projects. There's quite a bit of need for these projects to get up and running immediately. And alternate delivery definitely drives schedule more than anything almost.
Cool. So the last question I had, which you kind of mentioned a lot of this already, was just how a utility or engineer can determine what works best for them. And so it sounds like you need to weigh these pros and cons of how does your cost structure look like? What type of resources do you have to collaborate? How deep can you go in that regard? Are there other things that utilities and engineers should be considering when they are looking at these alternative models as well?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things is, and I mentioned it, is the legislature. There needs to be a concerted effort about creating legislation that allows flexibility in choosing a delivery method. Design bid build may be appropriate for a small lift station or some pipeline work heading through the city, but on a mega project or even a $50 million rehabilitation of an existing plant, you're going to want to look at things early on to understand what's underground in that plant, what pre-construction services can the construction manager provide. So it's really not that one size fits all thing. Owners need to think about, from my perspective, risk, right? The goal of alternate delivery, one of the biggest things that we talk about is pricing the risk out of the project. When you get the contractor on board early on, we love risk and we price it every day. And it's our job to then guide that through the pre-con phase and ultimately into the construction phase, so that at the end of the job, the contractor has ideally mitigated weather, by doing things in a certain time of the year, ultimately mitigated safety risks by qualifying contractors such that their safety program and their safety metrics measure to what the owner is looking for, quality incidents, any type of claims with regards to subcontractors, right? So a lot of different things, from my vantage point, again, value and risk is really what an owner needs to consider when they start talking about large infrastructure projects.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to us about this and really kind of helping us make heads and tails of this. I really hope that it helps our audience as well make heads or tails of all these different
Sure.
models. If you want to learn more about those models, definitely check out the article on our website. You can see that in the description below. And thank you again for being on the call, Christian. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it tremendously. Thanks, Bob.